Good afternoon. My name is Lucy Ingram, and I am a faculty member in the Arnold School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. And I'm also the co-lead of the research education component of our CADMR, and that stands for the Carolina Center on Alzheimer's Disease and Minority Research. I would like to welcome you to our seminar series on female scholars in aging research. Thank you all for joining us. Our speakers for today are Drs. Marvella Ford, Sue Levkoff, and Lesley Ross. Dr. Ford is a professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences at the Medical University of South Carolina and Associate Director of Population Sciences and Cancer Disparities at the Hollins Cancer Center. She is also co-lead of the research education component of the CADMR. Dr. Sue Levkoff is a professor in the College of Social Work at the University of South Carolina. Her research focuses on gerontology, gerontechnology, and caregiver support, and she is one of the principal investigators of the CADMR. And lastly, Dr. Ross is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Clemson University. Her research expertise involves cognitive aging, interventions to maintain healthy aging, human factors, and applied everyday outcomes. So today, Drs. Ford, Levkoff, and Ross will begin with their personal stories of navigating success in aging research, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So please join me now in welcoming our speakers for today.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I didn't know if this was informal or if we're using slides or.
Informal is great.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here today. I really appreciate everyone. And I think that, we're all starting in different places. So I guess that's the first thing is it's hard. This business is very competitive, but it's important not to compare yourselves with anybody else because we're all coming from different places. And it's kind of like when you think about your career, whenever I get anxious, if I start to compare myself with someone else, I remind myself, it's like being at the gym. You look around the gym and everybody's there for a certain purpose and you can't really compare yourself because everybody has their own goals, right? So at the same time, there are shared goals. Of course, everyone wants to get promoted, everyone wants to get tenure. But I think that for me, what has been most helpful is looking at colleagues as collaborators rather than as competitors. So I think that's one of the biggest take-home messages of my career is, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I completed my undergraduate work at Cornell University and then went to the University of Michigan for graduate school. I was in the joint program in social work and social science at the University of Michigan. So we completed 2 master's degrees, 2 qualifying exams, and then the PhD had to have both content areas. And my content areas were social work and social psychology. And I really believe that being able to have a more a non-discipline specific view of the world has been extremely helpful because from there, I went to Henry Ford Health System, where I worked in the Resource Center for Minority Aging Research. And before that, it was the Center for Medical Treatment Effectiveness Programs. And we had to be really flexible. I was working on diabetes and asthma, and then started working in cancer. So in 1990, well, I give you the years, I guess, but I will give you the years. I will say, after my postdoc at Michigan, I went to Henry Ford, and soon, I think about a year and a half later, I got my first big grant, over $1 million back in the 90s. And that was from the National Cancer Institute and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So that was, just getting thrown in. So I think it's really great to have experience managing pilot projects because everything that you learn about managing a budget, managing a team, managing the study progress, all of that will translate into the next grant and the next one as they get successively larger. And so I think having that experience with pilot grants was really great. for when I got my first large grant, because then you're thrown into suddenly, you have Doctors Friedman and Levkoff who are interfacing with program officers. When you get your first independent grant, you are the one interfacing with program officers, and the view is very different. The responsibilities are very different. So I think the academic system is really great in that it really helps to prepare people to take on increasing levels of responsibilities as they gain, hopefully, in skill levels in those areas. And I think CADMR is doing a marvelous job of really building up those skill areas to be able to go to the next level. So that's really great. After leaving, I worked at Henry Ford Health System for 8 years, and then went to Baylor College of Medicine and the VA Medical Center. So by then I was firmly entrenched in aging and committed to aging research. And so at the VA and Baylor, of course, most of the veterans are older adults. So the theme of teams just resonates throughout my career. So at Henry Ford Health System, I was working with teams of people in the medical treatment effectiveness program. I was with a center that was a center grant. Then we were able to get a resource center for minority aging research. Again, that was a center grant. When I went to Baylor College of Medicine in the VA, I worked in a center grant. What are the benefits of a center grant? You're not a lone faculty member. When you're a lone faculty member, you're scrambling for resources. You're scrambling for funds to be able to get a biostatistician to sit down and talk to you. You're scrambling for mentorship, everything you have to go after on your own. When you're part of a center, all of that is kind of handed to you because your success is the center's success. Mm-hmm. When you're part of the center, when you succeed, that is the center's success. And so that's, to me, one of the major benefits of working in a center is you've got a whole group of people who are invested in your success because their success is dependent on yours. Mm-hmm. That outside of a center, I have not seen that in academia. It's sort of every person for themselves. There are some, departments where there's, of course, support, but a center, where you're really all working towards a common theme, a common goal, a shared mission is something that really drives me. So every single place I've ever worked, and I've been in this for 26 years now, almost 30 years, every place I've ever worked has been in a center environment. And actually that's what I look for. If I don't plan on leaving, but the few times I have left wherever I was, being able to walk into a center was one of the driving factors. Because I want that support, I want that team. I like working in a team. So at Baylor College of Medicine, I walked into a team and I was able to join the measurement corps. And we wrote a lot of papers. The other thing about a center is you walk into an already made team. So you don't have to, when you're new to campus, you don't have to try to figure out who's doing what. You walk into a team that's ready made, and then they connect you with other people on campus. So I think I can't say enough good things about working as part of a center. And I think as a woman, I don't know if it's a style that's associated with being a woman or if it's just my personal style. I really like camaraderie. I like collegiality. I like working together. And I think, Maya Angelou, her poem was, "And still I rise," but I think it's, "And still we rise," we rise together. And so when you're part of a center, I personally think you get more papers out, you have more opportunities to get grant funding because you have so much more support. Mm-hmm. You're protected in that way. Mm-hmm. And coming to MUSC, it's interesting because the first year I was at MUSC, I was not part of a center, but my former director recruited me, Dr. Barbara Tilley. Mm-hmm. And I went because she was there. And so even though I wasn't part of a center, she was there and I was with her. But within a year, I was recruited to the Hollings Cancer Center. And that was awesome because, again, you've got a shared mission. There was a sense of excitement. We wanted to become NCI designated. Mm-hmm. Everyone was working toward a common goal. Mm-hmm. And so we worked together. We had a lot of meetings together. We developed strategic plans together. So I really like that kind of approach. And we were able to get NCI designation. So the same joy that came when CADMR was funded is the joy, you know, you have a team to celebrate with. You've got a whole group of people, and then you roll up your sleeves and you get to work together. So I think those are just my experiences. I think having a mentor is great. We've talked a lot about mentorship, and one mentor cannot provide all of your needs. So you may have a mentor for science, you may have a mentor for career development, you may have a mentor for negotiating the extramural funding system. And so those are my comments, and I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful.
That was great. Thank you, Marvella. Sue, you're up. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Marvella. That was really great to hear. And it's interesting how we have all ended up working together, because we are a team that values collaboration, that values this this common, the whole is greater than any of our individual parts. And you know, when that's actually one of the joys of, I agree. I too enjoy being part of a center, a group. And I'm going to give you a little history of how kind of that evolved for me. And so I started off, you know, in college in French and art history. At the end of that, didn't know what to do, didn't have a job, you know, spent a summer in New York living in my sister's apartment, decided I wanted to, you know, get a job. I went and talked to people, and people kept saying, well, why don't you think about social work? It sounds like you like working with people, you like, you know, that's something that you might like doing. I went and I got my graduate degree in social work, and I think kind of a pivotal issue in why I wanted to go on into doctoral work was that my frustration, one of the points that you asked us to think about, what was a pivotal point? One of my frustrations was going with an older man whose SSI was being taken away from him without his knowing why. And it was because they had overpaid him without letting him know. And of course he had, you know, used the money, and they were now asking for it back. And I thought, this is a system that just isn't right. We have to do something about this. So then that's when I applied to go to graduate school and to get a doctorate. And I got my doctorate at the Harvard School of Public Health. And I stayed on there as a junior faculty person. And that I kind of looked back at my CV before this talk. And I was also asked to give another talk within the College of Social Work about my research about grant funding it was, but it's really related to this. And I went back, and so I got my doctorate in 1984. So I've been here for like a decade longer than you, Marvella. I'm like aging in place here. So in 1984, and then I looked, and my first grant was 1990. So, and I look back, and my grants are center grants. They go from geriatric education center grants, you know, to K awards that led to exploratory center grants. I applied for one of those RICMARs early on when Barbara Tilley got it. I didn't get it, but you know, we finally got our own, you know, CADMR, and we're working together. But it's interesting for me. It wasn't. It's interesting. I wanted to say this. It's like one of my feelings is it's not really about mentorship, but it's about the research process. You really have to choose what you love doing. You know, I was at Harvard Medical School for most of my career, like 25 years, over 25 years. I never felt at home in my skin. I was always feeling like Marvella said, like it was a cutthroat. It was, you know, people aren't going to collaborate with you because you might, I mean, just ridiculous things. You know, I mean, so many things, but, you know, everybody's looking out after their own CV, and they are not willing to share because it might take away from something that they can do in the future. But I put up with that, and I put up with it for like 25 years. And my husband used to literally have to come over to my office and hang up on calls where I would have senior people screaming at me on the phone about something that I had done to protect me from putting up with these people who, were in a position to abuse me. So I put up with it for a long, long time, and it was a mistake. And one of my mentors was Julius Richmond, who was a former Surgeon General, and he kept telling me, Sue, you've got to accept one of these job offers that keeps coming to you. You're never going to be appreciated here where you are. You need to go someplace where you can be you and do what you like doing. And I was never going to be an R01 type researcher because in those days, they didn't have MPIs. Now it's different. I do a lot of MPI work, and it's totally different. And they're center grants. I have an MPI with a close colleague here at Harvard, who's at Harvard, and we're doing an intervention in Thailand on an intervention for older adults with dementia. But I lost my train of thought. What was I just saying about? Oh yes, so I was not that kind of researcher. I didn't want to be that kind of researcher because I didn't want to be. I looked at all these people that I worked with, and they're all so cutthroat and this and that and only doing their own thing and not helping junior faculty, which is really what I enjoy, is mentoring. And even back then, I wasn't mentoring junior faculty, but I was mentoring medical students and public health students to get along in their career. But I realized this, but I would have stayed. You know what? I absolutely did not know how to get out of it. So it was a really kind of self-destructive thing. But I think it was the glamour of being in this, it was like my mother could tell people that her daughter works at Harvard. I mean, it's really sad to say, but I really do think there was some sense of, I'm making my parents kind of, it's not a healthy thing. But anyway, so finally, when this opportunity arose to come here, I'm from the South. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. So this was just a wonderful opportunity. And what exactly, Marvella, you've talked about is what's happened here. I reached out to Daniela, and it was transformational to know that one could have a colleague that was truly collaborative, who really cared about the overall us as opposed to the me. That really was kind of transformational for me. And I think that people have to really think about, what do they want? I mean, how do they want to be spending their time? Who do they want to be spending their time with? And try to make sure that they're doing that so that they can enjoy waking up in the morning and going to work and doing, what they want to do. There's so many things that I could talk about, but I think maybe I might just stop. But I think in terms of mentoring, I think that what's important in terms of mentoring is to be able to be honest and to be able to be to feel comfortable approaching your mentor and admitting what you don't know, not pretending that you know. I mean, just say, to be willing to learn. I think that kind of that ties into the environment, this kind of this idea of environmental press in terms of aging research. You want to have an environment that's challenging and stimulating to you, but you've got to have the skills that enable you to take advantage of it in a positive way and succeed. So, to kind of be able to be honest with your mentors about what you need to succeed, I think is quite critical. And to really follow, I mean, there's so many ways to be a success. There's not the Harvard way. I had to get that over my head. That is not the only way to be a success as an academic. And I think that everybody has to find their own way. And a good mentor can help with that. A good mentor isn't going to say, this is the one and only way because I've chosen it. A good mentor is going to help you kind of find out what's the best way for you to pursue the kind of ideal environment that you're going to be most productive in. And I think I might just stop right now, and I'm happy to, chat more after, after Lesley talks.
Well, thank you, Sue. That was fantastic. And thanks for kind of picking up where Marvella left off. So baton to Dr. Ross.
Hi,
Welcome.
good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I see some really nice overlapping themes, and actually I'm going to ditto quite a few of those. I have a few differences with kind of how I've ended up where I am. I kind of grew up all over the place, moving around quite a lot. I think that's put me in a position, I'm a little bit biased towards change is good, pushing yourself to try new experiences, things out of your comfort zone are good. I think that's been really helpful for me growing up as an academic, as well as just growing up in general. I did not go to an Ivy League named university. I went to a tiny public art liberal university nobody's ever heard of in Alabama, of all places, because that's where we ended up when I was about 17. And then I went to University of Alabama at Birmingham. When I went to think about grad school, what I wanted was to get a PhD so I could teach. I wanted to teach a 4-4 at a small teaching college, very much like where I went to. That's what I liked. That was my plan. I went to University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is a very different place. It's a medical school. It's 100% grants. You get a grant, and the immediate thing that's said is, hey, that's great. What's the next one? So it's just very different type of place. And that's kind of where I fell into aging in a way. I found somebody I wanted to work with. She did gerontology. I said, hey, it sounds interesting. I went that direction, was pretty open to it, and ended up getting on a T32 mechanism, which supported me throughout my graduate training. And it was just a wonderful experience. It was in a center, it was in a Royable, NIH-funded Royable center. And I agree with everything that's been said. That provides resources, that provides a lot of different people's perspectives, which can be helpful. I think a piece of that too is when you're thinking about centers and institutes, don't just think about what can I get from it, but think about what can I provide to it. And I think if you have that perspective of this can be a bi-directional relationship, you're going to get so much more out of that. So when directors ask for things like, hey, there's been an interest in doing a brown bag series or something like the low-hanging fruit, volunteer, say, hey, I'd love to do that, because that's going to put you in a position that director is going to remember and say, oh, that was so helpful. I really appreciate it. That's also going to get you out in the community. That's going to get you out with other peers you may not interact with. So I think it's kind of a bi-directional relationship. I did a postdoc in Australia, also in a center, and then I ended up moving back to the States and was a faculty member at UAB and for a few years, then moved to Penn State. And I was at Penn State as a faculty member for about 7 years, and then just relocated or just moved down to Clemson here in 2020. So pretty much throughout my entire training, I have always been in a center and an institute. I do agree with everything that's been said. I think it's really helpful. Trying to push a little bit with other kinds of things. I also agree with the earlier comments about you need to set your own priorities. What is it you love? So when we think about academia, we think teaching, service, research, administration. What things do you really love? And it's not a one size fits all. Having a certain direction. I'm a big proponent that tenured line positions are great, but they're not the end all be all. If you love teaching, do teaching. If you love research and you hate doing teaching, do a research route. There's not that one's better than the other. They're just different. I've been on both ends of that. I've been in a research soft money position and I've been in a tenured position. So it's just a matter of what is it that you like to do. And what are your priorities, and really being honest with yourself with that priority and being okay with the fact if your priorities don't line up with a peer's priorities, that's okay. I think through being perseverance and really pushing through. It takes a lot of work to get things funded. You're going to have multiple doors slammed in your face. That's okay. That's part of the process and what you do with that. So don't shut down. Take that as a new challenge. Have your night off because everyone needs it when you get that grant back. But what is it you can get out of that experience? What are the reviews? Identify it and then double down. Hit hard. Go back to it. You will be able to be successful with it. Don't give up. It does take time. With that, be really open to feedback. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. When you get criticism, try not to be defensive about it. Immediately try to spin it as, what can I get out of this? How can I address this and be more successful? And that's a hard thing to do. And make sure that the feedback you're getting is reasonable. If you're getting feedback that's so different from what everyone else is saying to you, you want to think through what's a better path for you as an individual, as well as the team that you're working with. I'm very much a team-based scientist. I agree with all of that. So it's not just about the me and what do I need to do, but what fits in with the team. With the caveat, as long as that team, there's reciprocity, and as long as that team does the same for you, then when it comes to larger projects and things, they're also thinking about your career development, as well as how you can fit in to support the larger aims of the project. I think another piece is thinking through the new experiences and looking outside your circle. I've done that a lot of times through moving, hoping not to move again, mostly for my spouse. But it's a good thing to push beyond your immediate circle. Invite people that you've never worked with before. Meet with them first, see if it's going to be a good fit. Have very realistic conversations about expectations and needs, and be very concrete. Don't try to be so unbelievably polite that at the end of the conversation you don't have action items listed out and there's not a clear delineation of roles and what that means. But push yourself and try to work with people you haven't worked with, because they might have a different slant on something you're doing, which will really make your project and your work innovative. I think there's always a balance between this, especially for women. I think there's a balance between this, what's good for the department and being a good departmental member, versus knowing when to say no. And that's something on average, I think women maybe struggle with a little bit more on average, keep in mind. But it's tough. And so when service opportunities and things are coming along, being concrete with it and trying to take this particular activity and ask, is there something that I can not only give to help my department, because you want to be a team player, but what can I get out of this experience? And making sure that your service activities have some diversity within them so that you're getting the types of skills. So be a reviewer on an NIH panel, because that's going to give you a lot of insight to how that's doing. Make sure you're not always being put on the same type of committee, that there's nothing you're going to grow from that. And knowing when to say no, knowing if you really can't do a review because you're slammed, just say no, and it's okay. If you're having an issue with a chair that's pushing you into doing a level of service, come back with data to back yourself up. Don't say, I feel I'm being asked to do too much. Say, I am on 13 committees altogether. This is taking X amount of time. Present the data so that you have that backup to reason if there is an issue. I've been pretty fortunate. Most of my chairs have actually been really good. Formal and informal mentorship. There's all sorts of different ways to get mentorship. Making a list of what are the skills you want, what are the pieces of knowledge you want, and then parceling out who's the best person to fit those pieces. I think being really clear and having expectations up front with your mentor, a very blunt conversation on, this is what I want out of it, here's my expectations, and then listen to what the mentor says. If the mentor is telling you, hey, I'm happy to work with you, but honestly, I only have 30 minutes every 3 months, then think about, okay, what are the 30 minutes of that person's time I really want, and accept that and figure out how to work around it. Thinking about volunteering, especially as you're a junior, you're not going to necessarily, some people do. Most of us don't get an RO1 right off the bat. And I think pilot projects are great. I also think that volunteering to work on larger projects, that's what I did. I've done a lot of work on very large scale projects that I'm not a co-investigator on, I don't have any effort on, but I published a ton. I learned the skills. I learned how to balance budgets. I learned what the rules were. I learned what I was allowed to maneuver, what I wasn't allowed to do. So thinking about those volunteer experiences, and again, what's the trade-off of that? And then I think a big thing too is being comfortable with standing up for yourself if you need to. So if it's gotten to the point and you're feeling like you're being pushed too much, how do you stand up for yourself, and what's the best way to go about that? Never do it when you're mad. Do it when you've had time to think. Do it and have data backing you up to make the argument of why this is a problem. All of us are going to experience some type of sexism, racism, some kind of thing within our workplace, and being able to try to think, okay, this is a problem and how do I need to deal with this to make sure that I can be successful. Volunteering for committees, things like your Gerontological Society of America, volunteer for being a convener. That's going to give you a lot of exposure to other groups and a lot of leadership possibilities. And then I think the biggest thing is if you get to a point and you're saying there's a piece of my job I'm really unhappy with, start really asking yourself, okay, what is it that I want to maneuver so I can focus more on the things I love doing and maybe a little bit less on that other piece. But I've been very fortunate. I've had wonderful mentors. I've worked with a lot of different mentors. I've learned things that I love, certain things that they do, and I've tried to incorporate that into how I work. And then with some people I've learned, hey, I love this piece, but this piece isn't great. So let's try to make a mental note that I don't do that moving in the future. So that's my 10 minutes.
That was fabulous. Thank you all. I think many of us on the screen here have worked or collaborated with each other in some form or fashion, but I really do enjoy these more informal opportunities to get to learn more about about the pathway, right? And so, learning about you, Lesley. I see that we have a UAB overlap, so we're gonna have to figure out when we were both at UAB and how we cross paths. But no, thank you all for really sharing these gems of wisdom about your experiences. So I do have a few prepared questions, but I'd love to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions for our panelists based on what you've heard. Okay, if not, I will start where, that's Sue, yeah.
Before you start, I just wanted to add on to what Lesley was saying in terms of, I think also this kind of reciprocal learning, or maybe it was Marvella who was talking about this, I'm sorry, also happens when your mentees become your colleagues. I mean, I have someone who I mentored in the College of Social Work for his master's program. And I've kind of, continued to be, in touch with him, kind of helping him get into, not helping him, but kind of providing letters of support and contacting people in the aging network for him to talk to about graduate school. And he is now my statistician on all of my NIH grants. I mean, he's like, so it's like, it comes back to help you in the end. It's not, it's not just a one-way thing. It's like, it's like on the phone the other day, it was just the sweetest thing. He's an assistant professor coming up for associate. It's hard to believe, but he has 50 peer-reviewed articles and he's first author of 13. I said, do you sleep? I mean, how is this possible? But I mean, it's like, so you kind of get something back is all I'm trying to say. He's remarkable.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to
No,
say, it really is a
apologize.
two-way street.
It is, yeah, that reciprocal relationship is important, and I think is a strength of a fruitful mentor and mentee relationship when both parties understand that reciprocity. I do think it's very key. Daniela has her hand raised.
This was excellent. Thanks to all three of you for sharing your experiences. And I think something, I think it should be valued so much, and I value it when people share their experiences and how it links to what they're doing now. So, understanding that background is really helpful. So thank you. So we've talked a lot about mentorship, and I'm always interested in reading and learning about different types of mentors. And we have some students and junior faculty on the call today, and you've talked about mentorship and getting guidance from mentors. I wonder if one or more of you can speak to how did you find your first mentor and know that person, like maybe the good one, like think about how did you know what that was gonna be like, and how did you approach that? Was it assigned to you? Was the person assigned to you? Maybe just any experience that you can that you can think of sort of how that happened, and then maybe how that guided how you approach mentorship in your role now. So
I can talk a little bit about that, and actually it's pretty similar. I'll talking about my graduate mentor, postdoc mentor, and actually early career mentor are similar patterns. With a graduate school mentor, I was pretty pragmatic. I looked up recent publications. I wanted to see if that person was publishing with their grad students, if that person was always first on papers, or if that person was further down, because I was curious about that part, especially thinking about, and everyone has a different perspective on this. But to me, the more senior I become as I move up the ranks, the less important it is that first authored paper becomes. Of course, there's always exceptions with grants and certain things, but it's more about, okay, the people that are junior to me should have that because that's going to mean more to them. So I was very cognizant of that. And then with her, it was a good fit. We had a conversation. I felt like I understood what she was doing. She was very applied. That spoke to me. And frankly, she was in a center and there were resources. And I knew if I worked with her, I was also working with 6 other faculty. And I really, really liked that. My postdoc mentor, it was almost a bit of the same thing. I really loved the work she was doing. She was working with a variety of people, a lot of different areas, and I liked the breadth of the science she was doing. And she maintained a balance of doing exceptional science at the same time. And she had 100% different style than my graduate mentor. So that gave me a nice piece of it. And then working with my mentor as I was a junior faculty member, learned very, very different skills. His style was 100% different than the others that I had worked with. But it was a mix of seeking out people based on that question of what skills is it that I want to develop? And then also thinking about what needs do I have for my development? And those needs, of course, change as you move on. And I would definitely say if it was a choice between working with a big name person that looks great on paper, but there's not a good connection or they don't have the things that I need, I would much rather work with a more junior person that's got that time and energy to give to me. And that also I feel like I can have a contribution. And that piece, everyone's different, but that piece of not only getting something, but also feeling like I contributed to something is really, really important to me. So that was a big part of how I selected folks.
that's great. Thank you.
Marvella, I think you were going to chime in.
Oh, I was going to say something very similar. Just I was going to go back to graduate school. So it was great. We're kind of all speaking from the same place. And I remember when I interviewed for graduate school, I interviewed with someone who's really prominent in the field of social psychology, and she said that she would become my chair. She said, I'll chair your, the 619 was the qualifying exam. And she said, I'll chair your, all the way through to your dissertation committee. Pat Guerin is her name. And I didn't even know what that meant. I said, oh, thank you. And then when I started graduate school and I saw all my friends walking around trying to find people who would mentor them. And I thought, oh my gosh, now I understand what she was saying. She was saying, I will be with you for every step of the way. And she was with me. It was the qualifying exam. She chaired my master's thesis committee, and she co-chaired the dissertation committee. So that was really, you have these blessings that fall like droplets of water in your life. And that was one of them. And I've tried to pass that on to other people to say, to offer the same to them. Like, if you come here, I'll work with you. I can help. If you want, I would be happy to even work with you on your committee, always leaving it up to the person. But I think taking that stressor off of the mentee, their student, not having to find someone, just committing to them. And it really felt, to me, it felt like a vote of confidence, because she was saying, I really believe you're going to walk out of here with a PhD. So, and that's what I was there for. But the longer I was there, the more I realized what a vote of confidence that was for her to say that during my interview. You know, so I think finding mentors and then I love the idea of reciprocating. And I think once you've been mentored well, you just have kind of a spark in you to want to pass that on and to help other people in the ways that we've been helped.
I'm going to add something that's a lot more self-serving and in a way of more kind of, so the mentor that I had two major mentors in my graduate work. One of them happened to be someone who I had worked with very closely at Portland State University when we were both there, you know, many years before. So that was a natural. Then she came to Harvard and, you know, she was new to Harvard. I had been there like 2 years longer than her. So I could actually help her, introduce her to people as well. So it was a little bit, you know, reciprocity between the two of us. But the thing that's a little more self-serving is, so she basically was of the thinking that, and I'm also like this, and I'm sure it's from her as my mentor, one should not be spending one's whole life's work for your dissertation. Your dissertation should be in a space and time where you focus on this, but then you move on and you have a whole life ahead of you to work on other things, but don't try to make it your opus of, you know. And there were many people in the School of Public Health I was in training with that really were looking at it like that. Oh, it had to be this and it had to be that. And I was much more pragmatic and just kind of wanted to get through, and mostly because she was encouraging me to do so. So basically, another mentor I found was this wonderful person who I, you know, maintain, you know, a collaboration with, who basically had had a secondary data set, or had a data set that he offered me to do my doctoral dissertation using his data set. So it meant that I didn't have to start from scratch, which is what a lot of people do want to do. And I don't begrudge them. I think that's great if that's what you want to do. It wasn't what I wanted to do. So he became my mentor, and I work with him and the other mentor, and it was exactly what, I was able to get through. I was able to get, you know, several papers out of the working in that data set. But I remember the first paper that I submitted, and but it did get rejected. And I go to him and I'm devastated, in tears, and, you know, this, you know, horrendous thing happened. And he walks me over to a filing cabinet that is like really deep. I mean, like so deep. And he opens up the drawer and he says, "Welcome to my rejections," you know, and it was like, I needed to hear that from him. You know, this is my mentor who's the senior person, but look, he's got a drawer of rejection. So you need to have somebody that you can, you know, feel supported by through those ups and downs like that. So.
Yes, thank you, Sue. And Lesley, I think you kicked this off in terms of talking about positive mentorship experiences. I do want to flip to the other side of the coin and actually quote a colleague and friend, Dr. Mindy Spencer, who talks about tour mentors. So do you have any advice for navigating not so positive relationships with mentors, either navigating the relationship or exiting the relationship? But I think it's important to acknowledge that not all mentorship relationships are positive or productive. Mm-hmm. So if any of you has any advice or experiences that you can share along those lines.
Mm-hmm. I do. I mean, I think it depends to the degree. Sorry, I'm in the hospital. Baby's been born. I don't know if you can hear that. Mm-hmm. It depends the degree to which there's a problem. If it's a piece of the relationship that's a problem, meaning I want more exposure to grants or something really, really concrete, I would probably just seek that particular piece from somebody else. If it is a broader personality type of thing that I feel I cannot work around, that it's causing me harm in some kind of way, I would cease. And I have ceased the relationship. There's different ways you can do it. You can either be really direct with it and say, these things make me very uncomfortable. I found this other opportunity. I want to thank you, or you can be more subtle about it and basically gravitate, which is what I see most people do, where they say, hey, I found this other person. I'm going to start working with them more. Mentorship is a continuing contract, in my opinion. If at some point the other party is not holding up their end of the contract, then it's fine to go ahead and find that from somebody else, at least from my perspective. And that can also be from the mentor's side too. But I don't see any problem with, if there's a piece of something you're missing, getting that piece from somebody else. Just be upfront and honest. Just say, hey, hey, so-and-so, I'm also working with this person on this thing. And if you've done what you agreed to do with them and there's a problem, that would be concerning to me, because you are not owned by your mentor, nor do you own your mentor. It's a common agreement that if it's not being met, I think it's fine to break it.
Thanks for that. Other thoughts?
It's interesting. I don't have the one experience I referred to earlier, which is when my husband had to come over and make me hang up the phone on someone who was being abusive. She was not well, she was a mentor. I was a project director on a study where she was a PI on it. So she was a mentor. I mean, I didn't see it like that. This was after my graduate work. This was, while I was a junior faculty, a very, very junior faculty. I really don't remember how I got out of that, because I know she and I both stayed on the project. I literally don't remember, but I think it was minimizing my contact with her directly, because there were several senior people of equal seniority as she was. So it was my reaching out to those other people for checking in and feedback. But I don't remember a specific something. But it was a long time ago.
Okay, I have a question. Well, from my colleagues, some of the assistant professors, one question they have is, well, one experience they have is they did all the work, but they have to be a second author, and they kind of, asking, how, in which way they can actually tell their collaborators, especially the big name person, and I should be the first author. Do you have that experience, that kind of situation, and how did you handle that?
Well, one thing is, I think that people have to have those discussions up front before they start working on the paper. I mean, everybody needs to know what the expectations are. And if the junior person doesn't want to abide by the expectations of the senior person, then they shouldn't do the work. I mean, I think because it is up to the senior person to make that decision. But I really do think that a lot of problems could be avoided by having those kind of very clear conversations before work has begun. But I'm sure my colleagues have other, things to suggest as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think, as has been stated, when you have a good mentor, the mentor wants to promote the junior faculty member. And I mean, at least where I work, if you're a senior author, the last author, that position is considered the anchor author position. That's the senior author position. And so you would want the person you're mentoring to have a first authored position. But if the senior person is not offering first, second, or last authorship for someone who's doing most of the work, then I agree that could be avoided. I agree that having a conversation up front to say, who's doing what. I mean, and it doesn't have to be, you're not challenging the more senior person. You're just saying, could we please, before we move forward, could we clarify the roles? Can you tell me what our roles are going to be? Because the paper has to get written. So you want to find out who's responsible for which parts of the paper. And then you can introduce the authorship order. So it doesn't sound like you're just having a conversation about authorship. You really are talking about how the paper is going to be structured, how it's going to get written. Oh, and and what's the authorship, so which is the most important thing you want to talk about, but you can introduce it in a way that it doesn't make for such an uncomfortable conversation. And most people will really appreciate that and say, oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, let's think through this.
I think a piece with that too, and in my lab, we use a paper proposal form. So we have a lot of existing data. I'm really happy for people to use it and get papers out. But there's a paper proposal form. It's spelled out there. There is, I think that it's important to know, like authorship sometimes changes, right? The plan is to do this, but in the end, things moved and changed. I think that's normal. Continuing that conversation, I think is fine. Another piece too, and I find this more if I'm working with undergrads or sometimes first year graduate students, is they did put a lot of work. They did a lot of hours, they did a lot of work. But when you look at what's actually been published, there's only 2 sentences that ended up. So there's a question of who did the work for the final paper that ends up getting published and work leading up to it, and what's kind of training and what's, the final actual, we're getting this published. And it's a tough thing, I think, especially, again, if you're talking about junior grad students. I think faculty tend to understand that part more, but I think have it in writing. Do a form, have it in writing, spell it out. And there are resources online, APA and other resources that have worksheets and things that you can go through and kind of take a look at authorship and those kinds of things if there's a problem. But yeah.
Well, that was fantastic. And thanks, Ye, for that specific situation. I think it is one that does happen quite common. And so, yeah, being transparent and upfront about that, I think it's important on both parties, on all parties' sides. So thank you. So we are at 5 minutes to the hour, maybe one closing question, and then I'll wrap up with thank yous and announcements. So one strategy, let's go with one strategy can you, our panelists, share about ensuring a successful career in aging scholarship? So you've given us a bunch of wisdom and a lot of gems already, but if there were one closing message that you'd want to leave us with about ensuring a successful career in aging scholarship, what might that be?
I'd say good collaborators and a good support system personally.
Okay, collaborators and support. Other thoughts?
I think keeping track of what's important to you is really important. I mean, if there's something that makes you feel uncomfortable or some line of inquiry where you feel uncomfortable, then I think it's good to question that and take a step back and maybe look at it from a fresh perspective. I find that especially true in, when we're doing disparities research, where we never want to get in a position where we're like blaming people for having disparities, but sometimes it's just the way things are framed sometimes and the way they're written. And I think taking a step back and then thinking about how to reframe so that you're taking, and I think now that more people are taking into account the social determinants of health, that doesn't happen as much. But, earlier it was almost as if people were being blamed for their own disparities. And it's kind of like, well, that's not the solution. And so I think finding a group of like-minded people to work with, finding people who really care. There's a lot of money in disparities research right now, and not everybody who's really good at it really cares about the underlying disparities. So I think finding a group of like-minded people to work with who really do have a heart for the actual people who are affected by the disparities and not just the grant dollars that flow from this work is really important.
Right, thank you, Marvella and Sue.
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the one additional thing that I would say would be to keep open to new opportunities that you haven't thought about. Because there are different ways to have success, as we've talked about. And what might be success at one stage of one's life it might change later on, and to be open to that and to be willing to consider, do I want to change? Do I want to move in a different direction, which can be challenging and scary, but it might also be really positive in terms of your own, your own career. And I think it's just important to be open to that. And not to feel guilty if you decide not to go and do in a new direction, but just to be open to it and to consider it.
Very nice. Thank you for that. And I would say that an underlying theme, I can't remember which of you said this, but something that I see reverberated through your comments is really having confidence in oneself and in your decisions, and knowing, what your priorities are, and being able to communicate those well makes for a fruitful relationship and career. So again, thank you all. Please join me in thanking our panelists for today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences as we all navigate this road in academia and practice, but certainly in aging research and scholarship. So before we close, just a couple of points. As a way to ensure that we continue to develop and deliver quality, timely, and relevant content during these seminars, we want to ask that you complete a brief survey about your experience today. So to access the survey, as you see here on the slide, you may scan the QR code, or you can actually complete the survey once you are emailed a link at the conclusion of the seminar.